Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak, your podcast available every morning on Apple, Spotify or wherever you listen. It's Thursday, the 10th of October here in London. I'm Caroline Hepke.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, more than 2 million homes and businesses are without power as Hurricane Milton hits Florida.
The Fed minutes reveal details of resistance to Jerome Powell's half-point interest rate cut in September.
Plus, we look at a casino company's big bet on a country where gambling is illegal and why it's paying off.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
Hurricane Milton has arrived on Florida's west coast near Tampa. The storm came ashore near Siesta Key with winds of 100 miles per hour, according to the US National Hurricane Center. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis says the state is well prepared.
We have massive amounts of search and rescue equipment and personnel standing by. And we hope that there's not a big need for that, but we're prepared for that. And that's not just our state and local. It's also our National Guard, our State Guard. We have about 9,000 National Guard personnel between Florida and other states.
Ron DeSantis speaking there. Authorities say life-threatening storm surge and flash flooding will continue as the storm moves inland. More than 2 million homes and businesses in Florida are without power, according to data from poweroutage.us. The Hurricane Center says several tornadoes are also likely tonight across parts of central Florida.
Now, minutes from the FOMC's last meeting show disagreement among policymakers over the size of their September rate cut. The minutes said a substantial majority supported the 50 basis point move, but also showed that there was a preference among some officials to cut rates at a more gradual pace. The former Kansas City Fed President, Esther George, says the central bank faces a delicate balancing act at the moment.
I've always been among those that believe this last mile can be the most difficult. Because now you're trying to get from something in the neighborhood of 3% inflation to 2%. And over what period of time can you do that and still ensure that the public believes you will get back there, that those inflation expectations stay anchored? So I remain pretty focused on where we are with the current inflation dynamics.
Esther George speaking there to Bloomberg. The Fed minutes indicate that the Fed Chair Jerome Powell is unlikely to get another big interest rate cut from his policy committee as long as the US labour market holds up. According to the median estimates in a Bloomberg survey of economists, core US CPI inflation data, which is out later today, is expected to show that prices rose by 0.2% last month.
A potential Israeli attack on Iran's nuclear facilities is testing American influence on the country. President Joe Biden has warned against the action as US officials worry a strike on Iran's energy infrastructure could roil energy markets. But the US has few assurances against escalation. Mara Udman, professor at the University of Virginia, says retaliation may still go ahead.
What the US wants does matter to Israel. It may not be determinative. Okay. And so I would just caution with that. Ultimately, you have a sovereign country that's going to do what it feels is in its best interest to defend itself. The relationship between President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu is a different type of sticking point challenge. And I think that was reflected in Gallant's visit being put on hold by the Prime Minister.
Mara Udman, who is a former official in the Department of State, speaking there to Bloomberg. Sources have told Bloomberg that Biden's team is proposing alternatives, including a fresh round of economic sanctions on Iran in a bid to give Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu another option. Biden and Netanyahu spoke yesterday for the first time in more than a month. During that time, Israel has stepped up a campaign to target Hezbollah in Lebanon, killing most of its senior leadership, including leader Hassan Nasrallah.
Now let's go to the UK. The gilt market could face buyer's strike if the UK government decides to dramatically increase borrowing. This, according to an economist at Citibank. Bloomberg's Tiwa Adebayo has more now.
The Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, is preparing to launch her inaugural budget later this month. But Ben Nabarro, chief UK economist at Citigroup, has a stark warning for her. He says the prospect of new debt rules to allow more spending on investment could spark fear in gilt investors with limited appetite for new bonds. Reeves's current rulebook gives just £8.9 billion of headroom, according to the Office for Budget Responsibility. But a different measure she's thought to be considering would provide a £62 billion billion buffer. The Bank of England already boasts the second largest supply of government bonds in its history, and according to Nabarro, a rule change could just push investors over the edge. In London, Tiwa Adebayo, Bloomberg Radio.
Staying in the UK, the government's planning the most significant changes to workers' rights in a generation. Its new employment rights bill starts its process into law today. It's been heavily lobbied by both business and unions. James Wilcock has the story.
Ending zero-hours contracts, sick pay rights from day one, extending men's paternity rights with more reviews on the way. This is a mega bill, and it will change Britain's labour market. The government argue for the better, making people better paid and more productive. But some businesses have been alarmed by the bill. Federation of Small Businesses Policy Chair Tina McKenzie called it a rushed job. Many of the measures will be subject to further consultation, with the majority not expected to be implemented until autumn 2026. So expect further battles between business and unions ahead. In London, James Wilcock, Bloomberg Radio.
Meanwhile, the race to lead the UK's second largest political party is now down to 2 after Conservative lawmakers knocked out the frontrunner in a shock result. James Cleverly was seen as the unity candidate and near certain bet for the final runoff until the surprise ballot.
Kemi Badenoch, 42 votes. James Cleverly, 37 votes. And Robert Jenrick, 41 votes.
Jenrick and Badenoch are both seen as on the right of the party and have focused their campaigns on cultural issues and immigration. The pair will now make their pitch to Conservative members who last elected Liz Truss as party leader.
And Ben Ainsley says skippering Britain to America's Cup sailing success for the first time would eclipse his achievements at the Olympics. The America's Cup first began in 1851 off the south coast of the UK, but the country has never been victorious in the competition. Ainsley says winning it would be the top of his career highlights.
The fact that Britain has never won it, and we're such a proud sporting and maritime nation, that's the motivation for myself and the rest of the team, and absolutely it would eclipse anything that I've been fortunate to experience at an Olympic level because it's also a massive team sport.
The 4-time gold medalist will lead the Ineos Britannia team, backed by Jim Ratcliffe, against the reigning champions New Zealand in the final in Barcelona this weekend.
Those are your top stories. Now for the key market moves you need to know this morning. So the S&P 500 closed at a record high last night, up 0.7%, the 44th record in 2024. Tech shares led the charge, with Apple climbing by 1.7%. The US dollar also closed up 0.4%, rising for its 8th straight session, notching its longest winning streak in more than 2 years, although the dollar is currently down. The dollar's run was helped by 2-year yields rising 6 basis points in the session, continuing to erase expectations for Fed cuts. And in Asia, mainland Chinese shares, the CSI 300, are 2.7% higher.
In a moment, we'll bring you more on Hurricane Milton making landfall in Florida, plus tell you about the project to build the Arab Gulf's first casino. But another story that caught my eye this morning about the changing style of men's suits in the office. Suits are back, apparently, post-pandemic. People are wearing them, but they're looser. So they're more comfortable to wear. Essentially, this is
Really?
It sort of sounds like someone's trying to bridge basically athleisure that people were wearing during the pandemic and suits. This is a piece by our colleague Matt Berlinger has been looking at the new styles of suits.
I don't think it's just men's suits either. I definitely think women's suits are going the same way too, because it mentions that men's suits double-breasted apparently is in.
Yes,
that's also true for women's suits as well.
But it's also a question of it's slightly more relaxed, but it's not 90s baggy. Essentially, there's like a sort of a bridge here between
MC
this.
Hammer style trousers.
No, exactly, yeah. It's essentially slim fitting is out now. It was once a style of being very or a sign of being very on trend. Apparently, according to Max Berlinger, now it's not. And he actually points to things like the TV show Industry, which illustrates people working in finance who are wearing very drab clothes, plain jumpers and trousers in hues of black, navy, and grey. And apparently, this is an attempt to inject some more style and perhaps a little bit more levity into what people are wearing to work. Yet I have to say, I did read this and think, that all sounds very American to me, to be honest. I don't know if that's going to go down in offices here in the same way.
Well, there was a real battle over the tie about whether that was coming back, but I do see it in the City of London now. Also elasticated waistbands. But anyway, less said about that post-pandemic, the better.
Well, look, it needs must, etc. Let's turn back to our top story now, though, and the latest on Hurricane Milton, which made landfall in Florida in the early hours of this morning, UK time. Our weather reporter, Mary Hoy, joins us now for more. Mary, good to speak to you. What's happened then in Florida since Milton made landfall?
The hurricane made landfall as a Category 3 storm, and it's since dipped down to Category 2, packing winds of about 100 miles per hour, so down a little bit from 120 miles per hour when it came ashore. But nevertheless, it's still bringing damaging waves, life-threatening storm surge along portions of the west central coast of Florida, and then along with that also just destructive winds. We saw a stadium in St. Petersburg where there were that was supporting kind of hurricane response efforts. That roof of that stadium was ripped off by the wind. So we're really just kind of keeping track of, and then just seeing now the destruction that will transpire as the storm continues to move inland and across the Florida peninsula.
Yeah, absolutely. Densely populated areas. Where is the storm heading now, Mary?
It's heading east-northeast generally, moving across the central part of the Florida Peninsula, and it's expected to maintain that trajectory through Thursday and then eventually turn eastwards and emerge off of the east coast of Florida by late Thursday, according to the National Hurricane Center. But throughout that track, it's expected to maintain its hurricane intensity with both hurricane force winds and tropical force winds. Tropical storm force winds, rather, continuing to kind of exert damages across a large area of Florida.
Yeah, trying to think about, I suppose, the sort of damage that could be still to come from this, Mary. What should we be expecting then over the next 12 hours or so?
Well, the storm surge is continuing to affect large areas of Florida where Milton made landfall. One thing to kind of, I guess, consider is that while there's a clear system for categorizing hurricane wind speeds, there isn't as clear of a system for really communicating the risks of storm surges. And so hopefully, people who are in the area affected will have evacuated, but that's something that our reporters in the U.S., our colleagues in the U.S. are following as well, is whether people were able to get the necessary warnings to move out ahead of time.
Yeah, absolutely. OK, this is something that we're going to cover then for listeners throughout the morning, of course. Mary, thank you so much for being with us. That is our weather reporter, Mary Hoy.
To the United Arab Emirates now, where Wynn Resort started developing its newest casino 2 years ago, even though the government still hasn't technically legalised gambling. The 1,500-room property on man-made islands 40 minutes from Dubai is rising at a fast clip, and now the government has awarded a casino licence to Wynn 3 years ahead of the scheduled opening. Our Middle East finance and real estate reporter Zainab Fatah joins us now from Dubai for more. Zainab, good morning. Can you tell us about Wynn's project then in Ras Al Khaimah and how exactly it came about?
Hi, good morning. So yes, this is a project that was announced in 2022, and it was a surprise to everyone because, as you know, gambling is a criminal activity across the entire GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, 6 countries, including Saudi Arabia and the UAE. It's punishable by jail and fine, the whole activity of gambling. So it was kind of a surprise to everyone that they would allow gaming in the first place. But now we're beyond that, and a gaming authority has been set, and it granted its first license to Wynn. And the 1,500-room hotel, which was initially planned as a 1,000-room hotel, is actually being built. Wynn bought the entire island because they expect the growth to come later on. And the 4 islands that make up Morjan are now completely sold off as other developers are moving in.
If casinos and gambling are taboo in the Gulf, how are policymakers in the UAE then navigating this whole issue?
It's really a tricky one for them. So they're moving slowly. They're pretty much avoiding talking about it. The entire announcement of casino license being granted came from Wynn, and they didn't put out anything from here. It came in the middle of the night. As you know, the entire region is right now consumed by the news of war in Lebanon and in Israel and Palestine. And you're finding now that amid this news cycle, the news came out, there isn't that much discussion of it. Policymakers try to avoid uttering the words casino or gambling. In a way, they're using the same playbook they used years ago when they allowed alcohol. So Muslims weren't allowed to drink, and citizens weren't allowed into bars. And little by little, we started to see kind of relaxation of those rules. So far, the government is selling this as this is something that we must do to help.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.